Has anything strange, paranormal, scary happened to you, and no matter how hard you think about it rationally, you cannot explain what happened? When I was 13, my uncle went out of town and asked me to stay at his place to keep an eye on it. I invited my buddy to come spend the weekend with me so I wasn't alone. We were hanging out in the attached garage watching TV around 1 AM when I realized I forgot to turn off the pool pump. When we opened the garage door to the backyard, we were flooded with this overwhelming smell of burning meat. Right when I smelt it, I was overcome with a feeling of dread and my gut told me not to go outside, so we immediately closed the door. As we closed the garage door, my uncle's dog started barking and growling at the other door, which was open and leads into the house. She was barking, growling into the darkness of the hallway. As we slammed that door shut, the electric dartboard went haywire. It was making all sorts of crazy noises and flashing all of the lights like the entire thing was short-circuiting. Then out of nowhere everything just stopped. The feeling of dread went away. The dog stopped barking at the door and the dartboard shut off. We did not sleep at all that night, and thankfully my uncle came home the next day. I'm not really sure how to rationalize all three of those things happening at the same time. Well, that's horrifying. A few days before Princess Diana died, I had a dream my grandmother came into my bedroom to tell me Princess Diana died. Probably just a bizarre coincidence, because Diana was all over the tabloids, so maybe she was just in my subconscious for that reason. Still kinda weirds me out, though. I remember my brother waking us up the morning saying she died. My mom says she had a dream about dying in a tunnel that night. When I was 12, I had just came home from school, and as usual I was the only person in the house. Siblings at friends or after school programs. Parents at work. Anyways, I walked into my kitchen to grab a snack and I immediately felt this weird sensation that I've never felt before. I got really sick to my stomach and made my way to the dining area and just collapsed onto a chair. I sat there with my head hanging down when it had just hit me how silent it was. I lifted my head and gazed the room for a bit. After about 20 seconds or so of just pure tense silence and nothingness, I relaxed a bit when out of nowhere this loud noise came from directly beneath my chair. It literally sounded like if paper was being crumbled. I leapt out my chair, and as soon as I did, I just hear what sounded like a little girl giggle, followed by these soft but loud footsteps running down the hallway away from the kitchen towards the front of the house. I slowly backed into the wall behind me without taking my eyes off the door leading to the hallway, and then proceeded to make my way to the back door. Once I reached it, I bolted out of there and ran to my friend's house, which was only 3 houses down from me. I called my mom at work and she told me to just stay put. That is still the most unexplainable thing to ever happen to me. That sounds terrifying. I would have had a heart attack. I was driving along a very remote stretch of road. No houses or population for hours in any direction. Wasn't paying much attention as I wasn't expecting any living soul in the area. However, I ended up passing a woman wearing some kind of white robe. As I passed her, I noticed she was waving her hand as if she was asking to hitch a ride. Half-heartedly I went back. I could still see her in my rear view. I usually don't offer to hitchhikers ride as I'm advised against it by my parents. However, I'd feel really bad to let someone be out there that late. But once I reversed back to her, she was nowhere to be found. I could swear I had her in my rear view mirror the whole time, but there was no trace of her in the end. If this were a movie, a few seconds after you try to look for her would be a violent jump scare where she would be on top of the hood screeching as blood-soaked spider appendages burst out of her chest. This is super mundane, but it happened to me at work recently, so might as well share. Went to use the woman's bathroom, and when I went in, all the stalls except 2 were full. There are like 8 stalls. I go in to pee for like 2 minutes, and when I come out all the stalls were empty. I didn't hear any doors open, any toilets flush, any hands being washed, or anyone walking around. Also, a cup of coffee that had been on the sink counter when I walked in was still sitting there. So in conclusion, ghosts are nasty and don't wash their hands, and one of them forgot their coffee. Thank you. This made me laugh. Probably not as extreme as some others here, but when I was about 13 or 14 I was walking home from being out with a few friends. It was around 9 PM in late autumn, so it was pretty dark at this point. On my way back I had to walk down a road that was the only way to get into my estate, so despite it being dark and it looking fairly sketchy, I wasn't concerned, having walked through there 100 times before then. When I was about halfway down I felt a hand grip my right shoulder. It didn't just feel like something touched me, it squeezed my shoulder with a good amount of force, and when I looked over my shoulder I was greeted by nothing but thin air. Safe to say I freaked out and proceeded to run the rest of the way home. Upon a bit of paranoid research I found out somebody had killed themselves in a house on that road not too long before my passing by. I've always just hoped it was an overactive imagination or something, but I've never fully convinced myself. It was a normal night. The family all had supper, watched a bit of TV and then headed for bed. It must have been an hour later when we all heard the tiles in the ensuite bathroom start to crack. It was the scariest thing I have ever heard in my life and lasted a full 5 minutes. I called out to my parents and they told me to stay in bed. I'm not sure if they checked it out, but when I went the next morning, all the tiles had pulled away from the wall but none of them had fallen off. I'm sure there is a logical explanation. At least I've hoped for one my entire life. For what happened, but for 10-year-old me, it was terrifying and spooky as heck. Maybe it was Fortunato from the Cask of Amontillado. I was sitting in my classroom in grade school when all of a sudden I had this overwhelming sense of despair hit me out of nowhere. It was like that feeling when your heart drops to your feet but magnified tenfold. I turned to a girl next to me and told her I feel like something really bad just happened. I learned later that day my brother jumped off a 15-story building literally right before I told my classmate. She found out the next day why I wasn't in class and apparently had to be sent home. I actually talked to her somewhat recently and it still freaks her out. Holy crap. I heard someone singing directly under my bed. There was nothing under the bed that it could have been. Phone, iPod, radio, speaker or whatever. It sounded like a woman literally just laying under my bed singing. I jumped off my bed and looked under and there was nothing, but for some reason the room felt so much darker under the bed. The singing stopped as soon as I jumped off. I haven't heard it since. On my teen days I was online dating someone from another country. I know, lame. I was deep in love at the time and she said she was going to see a friend. I didn't have anything to do so I went to bed. I started to sleep awake. IDK if it's the right word for it. And at first I started to listen to voices and I couldn't figure out what they were saying. Then I saw 5 or 6 people laughing and drinking in a living room. I woke up and wondered about it before sleep again. Next day she posts pictures and it was the exact place and people I saw. Besides her. At boarding school I had this big, loud butt alarm clock. Unmistakable. Well, one day I forgot to set it or something. I wake up at 9. Sun shining through my window. It's a new day, and I'm late to class. I rush to put on my uniform, brush out my hair, get my crap together, skip food or brushing my teeth, get out the door. This whole time I'm praying for God to turn back the clock so I won't be late. Now, this dorm has alarmed doors. They turn on automatically from like 9 PM to 6 AM. Anytime the door opens between these times, the fire bells go off. As I'm running down 3 flights of steps, it's getting dim outside. I dash out onto quad into the grey misty morning. The sun hasn't risen, but still illuminates the sky. A single monk is walking by, and I ask him what time it is. The 5 o'clock bell just rang. He tells me. I realize I don't know him. It's a small school. Most everybody knows everybody. I thank him, confused, and head back to my room. By some miracle, the alarms don't go off. I go back to my room and browse on my computer, mystified by my experience. No one believes me. Be careful for what you asked from God. I was really tired from a day at placement and I laid down on my side on my bed and was facing my laptop. On the left was my chair which was facing me right next to my bed. I checked the time and around 5 minutes later I quickly involuntarily drifted off into an extremely vivid dream that would horrify me to this day. I dreamt that I was at uni in class when this girl with long black hair and no face came to the door asking for me, saying that I had won a prize and to go with her. I stood up and followed, as although she had no face she wasn't threatening and had a pleasant but strange presence to her. We walked down a hallway and I asked what my prize was. She said, "You will see, but you have to do something first." I said sure and asked her what I had to do. She stated that I would receive a great prize but I would have to earn it through public speaking and I would have to make a speech in front of a large crowd. I said that I would accept the prize but there was no way I would do a public speech. We arrived at this door and she told me to open it. I opened it and walked through to find a red carpet with rows and rows of people in seats with a stage at the end. An announcer announced my name and everyone turned around looking at me while clapping. I was horrified and said, "Nope, you can keep your prize." The faceless woman was behind me and pushed me forward. I instantly moved back and said, "I don't want your prize." This angered her. What happened next still fucks with me till this day. She was beside me and I looked just in time for her to slap me on the back. The strange thing was it was the biggest slap I have ever felt in my life. It was 10 rapid slaps in one. I instantly woke up as I jolted forward and felt pain on my back where I had been slapped. I turned around and saw the vacant chair and no one was there. My back felt like it had actually been slapped and I was freaking out. I went and checked the mirror and I had a handprint on my back. Only 10 minutes had passed since I last checked the time. TLDR. Fell asleep briefly. Had a dream that a faceless woman got angry with me and slapped me 10 times in 1 second. Woke up in pain and with a handprint on my back. Mentally scarred to this day. It's so weird in dreams we are willing to do things we would never do in real life. Like follow a faceless girl anywhere. Bought a foreclosed house. Downstairs doors were missing and covered with plywood. I move into house and a few weeks later plywood is gone and doors are perfectly hung. Benevolent tweaker perhaps? Months later the old propane tank I need to figure out how to dispose of disappears. I'm thinking handyman ghost? Honestly no idea. A handyman ghost is what I never knew I needed until now. Thank you for sharing this. I lived in what I've come to realize must have been a haunted apartment for 7 years, so I have a lot of these. I know it sounds crazy, and you don't have to believe me. I wouldn't, if I hadn't lived it, but since you asked, I'll give you the highlights. Small handprints would sometimes appear on the bathroom mirror when I showered. I moved in when I was almost 13, and the only other person who lived there was my mother. The handprints were the size of a child under the age of 10, and they aspirated periodically for the entire time we lived there, and they never got any bigger, for periods of weeks to months at a time. One specific door, the bedroom directly across from the bathroom, would seem to have a mind of its own. We could not make it stay open or closed during these time because it would close and open itself at random. Normally, when this happened, it would move slowly, but on one occasion it slammed itself shut. It wasn't doing it because of a draft or uneven floors, because for 90% of the time we lived there, it was a totally normal door, and it only had 4 of these rebellious periods. Things would move on their own. 2 very notable examples of this were the time a 20-ounce can of peanuts flew clear across the room and scattered peanuts everywhere, and the time the chain of the chain lock started swinging spontaneously and continued to do so for 5 minutes. These things happened in the same week. The building was built in the 1930s, so there was no central ventilation. We had 2 window unit air conditioners. That's it. I would get scratches from nothing. Most of them I could explain away, but a few were unexplainable, such as the scratch on my thigh that I got while in gym class, while surrounded by people, none of whom saw anything unusual, and the cut all the way across my wrist that showed up when I was putting shampoo in my hair. There were a lot more, too, but this is already pretty long, so I'll leave it there for now. To be fair, if ghosts are cutting you and slamming things, you need to get your apartment blessed or smudged. Ghosts who do that do not have good intentions. One of my best friends in high school and I used to drive to all the haunted spots we could find in our state. Sometimes we'd get other people to come and sometimes alone. Creepy stuff happened a lot, but it was usually us just being on edge and most could be explained away. One thing happened though that I will never forget and I can never find a logical reason for. One night her and I were alone playing our little game, but this time we stuck to our own town. We were heading to a bridge that is known for creepy stuff happening and we were passing through a neighborhood we had both been in a million times before. It was a quiet and darker neighborhood filled with only houses. She turned on a street, again that I had been on before, and there was a gravel road into woods in front of us. I said something like, "What the heck? I don't remember this," and she was dead silent and drove onto the gravel and into the trees. We were driving and there were turns and curves, but this gravel road and trees were all that was around. I kept saying I was confused. This wasn't supposed to be where we were and my friend was agreeing. We had been in this area countless times and there were any woods or gravel roads. I felt so uneasy. She gave me her phone and told me to pull up Google Maps and see where it said we were. It wouldn't pin our location and I was pretty much all but crying and hyperventilating at this point. We drove for a while and couldn't find any roads leading out or where we came from. Finally, after forever, we got out of it and she just kind of silently took me home. The next day we decided to go find it again, took the exact same roads and there was nothing there. The neighborhood was normal. If I was alone, I would have chalked it up to falling asleep or losing my dang mind, but we were both together and the exact same thing happened. Whenever I tell people about it, I'm not sure they believe me, but it still gives me goosebumps. Nothing overtly scary happened while in these woods, but they 100% weren't supposed to be there. Stop stepping into the sixth dimension. Copied from another thread I replied to about a year ago. I have multiple experiences, mainly at hospital. I'm a nurse. But the worst one for me has to have been when I was at a friend's house. We were chilling in his back garden at around 2/3 am because one of our other friends had just had a massive argument with his GF. So there we were, height of summer, in his back garden. No drinks, no drugs, just there chilling, smoking a cigar in the garden and talking about nerdy things. I was facing the pair of them and sat on my left hand side in patio furniture. So there was the arm attached to the seat but a huge gap with a table next to me, when something cold grabbed me and pulled me from my chair. Like literally pulled my by my jeans. My friends just kinda shut up and stared before we all went home without saying a word to each other. I have multiple stories but most of them are at the hospital, and not really affected me in a drastic way. You should tell some hospital ones if you haven't somewhere else already. I've never had an experience but my parents sure have when I was really young. I have a strange one, not a ghost story. I've literally never spoken about to anyone. Small backstory. I have had a few significant personal events happen in my past. Parents split around age 1 and moved out of state away from my father and large extended family around age 5. I also lived in about 8 different houses before my out of state move. I believe that because of these events I have memories from a lot younger than your average person. I have confirmed memories by talking to my parents from as early as 2-3, and one unconfirmed from 1, a memory of my parents still together. So now to the strange. I remember being very young, 2-4, and being able to see what my mom sees. I would close my eyes and essentially be able to see out of hers. I don't remember much of me doing it, but I vividly remember the day it stopped. I woke up and thought to myself, let's see what my mom is up to. I closed my eyes, and nothing. The ability was gone. I just laid there and thought to myself, verbatim, huh, I must be growing up. And that was it. I didn't give it a second thought. It was almost like I knew it was going to happen and accepted it. I've this memory my entire life, and think about it time to time. It probably is just an overactive imagination, but coupled with other experiences, memories, and dreams, it really makes me wonder. When I was a new mom, shortly after my grandmother had died, we visited her family cottage several states away. It was a small cottage, and my son was only about 4 to 6 weeks old, so I was worried that he would keep my other family members awake at night with needing to be fed, being new to the world, etc. So, the inevitable happened, and my son would not stop fussing in the middle of the night. I decided to go outside with my little guy to get a bit of fresh air. The cottage had burned down to the chimney a couple of years earlier, and the house had been rebuilt, so I wasn't familiar with its new tea and bits. So, I went outside and apparently the door was unlocked from the inside but the outside lock was engaged. Now here I am, in the middle of pretty much nowhere, locked out of the house at 3 AM with a newborn. I tried the door again and could not get it to open. I even threw pebbles, and then rocks at my husband's window, to no avail. As I sat outside the door, my back leaning against it, about to lose it completely, I heard a click. The door was unlocked. The door that I had tried dozens and dozens of times to open simply unlocked. Everyone was still soundly asleep and didn't recall hearing any noises at all in the morning. The door had a window, and I could see the entirety of the bottom floor through it. No one was there, but it unlocked for me. Props to you for traveling with an infant. That takes lots of patience. Perhaps it was a relative who recognized the new mommy struggles and decided to throw you a bone. Most of the stories on this thread have given me the creeps, but this one gives me the warm fuzzies. Mine was more of a collection of things, rather than one happening. The house I grew up in appeared to have something paranormal going on. It had your typical ghostly stuff, doors opening by themselves, sinks turning on, footsteps up and down the hallway, items would go missing and reappear. There were a few incidents that were really interesting. It was about midnight and I was sleeping. Suddenly my stereo, this is the 90s, turned on full blast. When I got up and shut it off I realized it wasn't plugged in. Was reading in bed facing the wall and suddenly my whole body slightly rolled, like it would if someone sat next to you on box springs. Asked my sister what she wanted. No reply. Mom? No reply. By this point the hair on my neck was standing on end. I was only about 10 and way too scared to roll over and look. Ended up falling asleep with the light on facing the wall. The most interesting one was the time we all left the house and when we returned the kitchen chairs were all tilted backwards and balancing on their back legs. It was some straight up poltergeist crap. I ran to get my camera but it scared my mom so bad she immediately propped them back upright and refused to talk about it. Oh my goodness, the last paragraph chilled me to my bones. Sounds like something straight out of a horror film. When I was around 10, my older brother, his friend and I used to hang out in the forest near our friend's house. One day as we were going back home on the dirt road connecting the forest to his house, my brother tells me, "Look behind you but don't make a noise. Something is following us." Now, my older brother was always one to invent stuff, so at first I didn't believe him at all, but I turned around anyways. My heart froze instantly. At the forest edge, around 30 m/100 ft away, I saw a sort of animal that looked a bit like a deer, but standing on its hind legs like a human next to a tree, looking in our direction. My brother's friend saw it too and obviously we all freaked out. We began collecting rocks and branches to defend ourselves, and they put me in the middle of our little formation. We went back as quickly as possible, often looking behind us, but it didn't follow us or leave the forest. When we arrived we began to nervously talk about what we had seen. At this point we began to exaggerate, saying it had fangs and red eyes, but I still remember what I really saw and it really scared me for a while. What we saw was not super close to us, so it could have been a weird tree optic illusion and my brother trying to scare me I guess, but we never went back after this. I'll always take the chance to retell this one. Me and my friends were fresh out of high school and we wanted to go on a camping trip. A couple of weeks before the trip I had a dream that I was driving down a hill towards a lake. Suddenly I came across a curve in the road that was obscured by the plant life. I was going too fast and ended up rolling down the hillside and landing in the lake, where me and one of my friends began to drown. At this point I wake up in a panic and do my best to write it off as anxiety. Fast forward 2 weeks. Me and a friend are driving to the campground and we turn into the campground and see the exact freaking road from my dream. Being reasonably freaked the frick out, I slow down and, sure enough, there's a sharp, hidden turn in the road I would have missed if I hadn't slowed down. Parallel universe, you didn't fare quite so well, apparently. When I was in high school back in 2007, I was home alone and doing my homework online. Suddenly I felt someone standing behind me and blowing their breath on the back of my neck. When I turned back, nobody was behind me. I arrived home and saw my husband's car parked and thought to myself, it's Friday, nice, he's home early. I go to my room to change when I remembered that I had forgot to pick up something to make for dinner. I go to knock on the bathroom door, hearing the water running. My husband was in the shower. I asked him if he wanted anything from the store. He replied with yes. So I asked like what, and then he asked for a towel. But me being in a hurry, I ignored him because we always keep the shelf stocked with towels. So I yelled by I'll be right back. I opened the front door and I see my husband pull up in the driveway. Unbeknownst to me, he was being dropped off since his car tire was flat that morning. We go look in the bathroom and it's empty. The shower and tub are dry, but the mirror was fogged. It was his voice. It sounded exactly like him. Makes me wonder if something tried to lure me in, or was it a glitch in the matrix? That's terrifying. What did he say when he saw the fogged mirror? Would you ever purposely ignore a request like that from your husband? I know I wouldn't, just out of guilt. So it's probably even stranger because your mind subconsciously knew not to heed his request. I have a twin sister, and although I don't recall this specific story, my mom does. When we were about 2, my sister had to have her stomach pumped. My dad was with her and I was home with my mom. She was changing my diaper when I began to cry out in pain. My mom checked me over but didn't see anything that would have caused me pain. She noted the time and finished changing me. A few minutes later my dad called to let me know the tube had been taken out. She asked what time and it was exactly the time I had begun crying. Another time when we were in high school, I was sat at my lunch table with friends when my sister's teacher approached me and asked if my sister was feeling okay because she hadn't been in class. We never cut class and she had been on the bus that morning with me. My immediate response was, she went home with a fever. I truly had no way of knowing this as we literally never crossed paths in school. 2,100 students. It turned out to be true. The way I just said it without hesitating still unnerves me. It could be worse. I have friends who are twins and one of them regularly feels her sister's labor pains. The other has had all C-sections. And then the other one knows when her sister is pregnant because she gets her morning sickness. This is more than likely just a dream, but in all my life, never has a dream felt so vivid and real, and I have zero explanation. But it was the only time I've ever felt so unnerved from a dream and like a presence was there that I couldn't explain. I woke up staring at the ceiling and my so sleeping beside me, when suddenly a small voice, a whisper from a girl, not my so. The voice came from the other side of the bed. It said to me very clearly, "It lives in the attic." Before I can even finish saying WTF, suddenly several large bangs come from the ceiling above me and the ceiling starts breaking as what seems like something is smashing through the joists and drywall and causing the ceiling to cave in. I now wake up for real and the ceiling is fine. So wakes up asking if I'm alright as I basically jumped out of bed trying to catch my breath. That never happened again. Although a few months later my friend's kid was over on a play date one day and wouldn't stop talking about the man in the kitchen. There was no one there. It weirded me out. You need to check your goddamn attic, holy moly. I worked cleaning an indoor city pool in my younger days. I worked nights and I would be the only person in the building. One night while cleaning the change rooms at about 1 AM I hear a child's laughter followed by the sound of wet feet running across the pool deck. I raced out to check the pool area but couldn't find anyone. The pool area had clear views to everywhere for safety reasons, so it was obviously empty. Nothing in the water. The deck was dry. The only wet footprints were my own. I checked all the doors in the building, and everything was locked up tight. Spent the rest of the night looking over my shoulder. It didn't help that when the air system kicked on or off it made a slamming sound similar to a door closing. My family and I were staying in a hotel in Berlin. During the night, I thought I heard a loud banging noise, like someone was hitting the side of the TV in the living room. This woke me up a couple of times in the night, but I was too scared to get up each time it happened. It sounded like it was coming from right outside my room. Anyway, we had to leave the hotel the next morning. I thought I could be imagining the noises until my mother asked me if I heard the banging. She eerily described it as someone banging the sides of the television, which is the idea I had in my head before she said so. My brother and father didn't hear the noise, however. What worried me is that since that night, my mother has believed in ghosts. It's also unsettling to think the hotel was located very close to the Holocaust's Memorial Museum. Anyway, I didn't want to think about it too much. As we were leaving the hotel room, I had an indescribable terrifying feeling run up my spine. It was like a panicky, eerie, sixth sense. It was like something was right behind me, watching me in the dark. It was about 5 AM when we had to leave. I had a desperate feeling to get out of there. I'm not sure if I've been more scared in a single moment in my life. I have other stories pertaining to this, but when I lived with my parents we moved into a house around the age of 15 where a handful of things happened. In short, one of the hardest things to try and explain away is getting grabbed by my shoulder when I was home alone in the middle of the day and thrown to the ground. It hasn't mentally hurt me since, along with other things I witnessed when I lived there. I find it interesting at times. Never affected anyone else in the house, and I have my theories as to why, and that was the only physical contact I ever had. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.